Hello, everyone, and thanks for participating. My name is Jobst Landgrebe. I'm by training a physician, mathematician, but I also studied philosophy. I've come back to do philosophical research work as well. So today I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence pseudo-definitions. But before doing this, I need to introduce our view of complex systems because we will need this later on in the talk. So I'm starting with 2 slides about complex systems, and then we'll move to the definitions of intelligence. So what is a complex system? So maybe why do we need to understand a complex system? Because the animal and the human mind-body continua, which produce intelligence, are complex systems. Intelligence, even primal intelligence, is the intelligence of a bird or a mammalian animal, a non-human, has primal intelligence that gets produced by a complex system. So what is a complex system? So let's start with the Newtonian system. So Newtonian systems are systems in which one can apply models of physics. And they have become extended quite a bit in the 19th century with thermodynamics and statistical mechanics. And then another bit by quantum theory and also general theory of relativity, but they still remain Newtonian systems. So what is a Newtonian system? But by the way, can you hear me all right? Does it work? Okay, I assume yes. So Newtonian systems are made up by a small set of element types. For example, the solar system is made up by the sun and the planets, which are not many elements. The way the elements interact, they interact by the 4 basic forces or interaction types that are known in physics. And in this case of the solar system, it's gravitation. And actually only gravitation. All the other forces don't matter for the solar system, at least not with regard to the way the planets move around the sun. And they interact in a uniform and isotropic way. So the force that is interacting here, the gravitation, has its effect in a symmetric way all around the sun, and it is the same everywhere. I mean, it gets weaker and weaker, but in a law-like fashion. Also, there is no force overlay. So there are other forces like electromagnetic forces. There's, for example, light that comes out of the sun. But it doesn't interact significantly with gravitation. So if I model the way the planet moves around the sun, I don't need to take into account other forces than gravitation. The phase space in which the elements are placed or occur is deterministic and ergodic. So ergodicity is shown in small inset here. So an ergodic phase space means that all accessible microspace states of the space are equiprobable over a long time. So basically, in simple words, I can get to everywhere in this space with the same probability if I wait long enough. For example, if I have gas in a bottle, the molecules of the gas will distribute equiprobably over the volume of the bottle. So it has to be, so such a phase space is ergodic, whereas there are also non-ergodic spaces, to which we will get back in a minute. Such Newtonian systems are non-driven. Drivenness means that there is no force flowing through the system. So, for example, a steam engine has a driven aspect because all the time, while it's driving or under energy, all the time energy is entering into the steam engine by the burning of the coals, and then it's being dissipated. And in Newtonian systems, that's not the case. Such systems have no evolutionary properties, so they don't obtain new element types. They have the element types they have. So yes, the solar system could get a new planet because there could be a big asteroid could approach the sun and could be attracted by the sun and then start to orbit around the sun the way the planets do. So, but that wouldn't be a new element type; it would just be a new element. And they have fixed boundary conditions. That is, if the solar system is 4 light years away from the next solar system, which is Alpha Centauri. Now, if it would just be displaced by 1 or 2 light years, or even 3 light years, this wouldn't change anything. So basically, I can take the solar system out of its context and move it away, and it wouldn't change anything. Of course, if I would move it very, very close to Alpha Centauri, then the sun of Alpha Centauri and our sun would start to interact by gravitation, and then very terrible events could happen. But basically, ceteris paribus, I can just take such a Newtonian system out of its context. Now, complex systems are completely different. They depend on multiple arbitrary element types. They have different interaction types between elements. They have force overlay, so that means that several forces act at the same time and also interact. The phase spaces that they have cannot be predicted from the system elements, and they are non-ergodic. So they behave in a way that the microstates are not accessed over a long time with the same probability. And they're also driven. So they have inner or external drive. External drive is, for example, the steam engine that gets heated from coal. Internal drive is what humans or bacteria have. This is the drive to reproduce and also to survive. And drivenness means that there's a flow of energy flowing through the system all the time, and that this energy is dissipating. And they lack an equilibrium state to which they would constantly be converging. So a driven system doesn't come to equilibrium. It's always goes on. But when an organism dies, then it stops being driven, and then it also converges towards an equilibrium state, which is in this case entropy. Also, complex systems have evolutionary properties, so they can evolve new element types, and they have non-fixable boundary conditions, so they are context dependent. You can read this comparison of complex and classical Newtonian systems in Turner et al., a very good book about complex systems. So let's look at some examples. We have those 7 properties of complex systems. And the solar system has none of these properties because it's not a complex system. The steam engine has one property: it is driven. However, to reason about the steam engine, in many ways you can abstract from its drivenness. So, for example, the velocity of the steam engine, if it's used to drive a train, is proportional to the pressure that it builds up, and so on. And this property, if it's the only driven property, you can abstract from it for many predictions you want to make about the behavior. Prion is protein that can infect the brain and cause damage in the brain. You have heard of Jakob-Creutzfeldt disease, and you may also heard of bovine spongiform encephalopathia, which is also prion disease. And it has only 2 complex system properties, namely force overlay and non-ergodic phase space. And it has also non-fixed boundary conditions, but it lacks all the others. But then as soon as I get to the virus, I almost have all the properties. Virus is, although not driven, because it cannot synthesize energy. And then with the most primitive organism, I have all the properties of a complex system. So it is important to realize that most systems in nature are complex or deterministically chaotic. And so basically, there's only a very little Newtonian systems out there. And most of the Newtonian systems that we master are technical devices that we have designed ourselves. All of them are Newtonian. All of them are built using equations that we have designed ourselves. And that's what we really understand and master. But nature is chaotic and complex, and humans react irrationally to it often. So you can, if you think of how, for example, we are now reacting to this virus, what it's causing is complex, but the reaction is irrational, and that's because we feel that we cannot control it. On the next page, you can see, so I will give you the opportunity to ask questions after this slide. So on the next slide, we see now the problem that complex systems pose to machine learning algorithms. So basically, machine learning algorithms cannot model complex systems because such algorithms are large auto-parameterized differential equations, or partially auto-parameterized. And let's look at the problems of machine learning models. So on the left-hand side, you see the problems that everybody knows. So that they optimize problem-specific loss functions that don't generalize well, that they narrowly depend on the selected training samples and the specific annotations of these samples, that they fail upon heterogeneous annotation of identical input. So if identical input but different output, it will be very stressful, so to speak. I mean, it will not train well. They fail on sparsely populated sample space parts, which is very often a very big problem, and that explains why very often machine learning algorithms need so many samples, because if you look at the curse of dimensionality, which you can, for example, read in Trevor Hastie's wonderful book about statistical learning, you will see in chapter 1 or chapter 2 where he explains the curse of dimensionality, that very quickly you come from a topological perspective to a very sparsely populated sample space areas. And in such areas, the machine doesn't learn anything. And that's very interesting because humans and also animals are very good at applying their intelligence to sparsely populated sample spaces. Basically, that's the key of intelligence. Intelligence means the ability to react to new situations. And machine learning models completely fail in new situations, which are such sparsely populated sample spaces. They cannot be guaranteed to move to corrected outcomes. So if you have an erroneous behavior of such a system, and you try to correct the system once you've noted the error, it's very hard to guarantee that it moves to the corrected outcome. And while it's doing this, it may start to make new mistakes, because remember that the model itself is nothing but a hyperplane in a k-dimensional space. And this hyperplane, of course, I mean, if you change its shape to get a certain effect, you may get other effects you don't want to. Such models cannot perceive their own failure, of course. So they cannot really raise exceptions. Well, they can raise an exception if the data don't match the input type, but not much more. They cannot model far-reaching relationships. They cannot model semantics of mental type, objectification semantics. Here I'm using the German word, I apologize. So it's object type, mental types they cannot use. And that's why they fail at image or language interpretation. They fail completely. And they of course have not a sufficient exactness for really critical settings. That's the general problems that have been known for machine learning even before neural networks were invented, already before the deep neural networks were invented. Even in the 1970s, when there was just logistic regression and perceptron approach, it was already clear to every statistician that these are the problems of such models. On the other hand, there are also problems that are less well known, that are described in our book, There Will Be No Singularity, that we expect to publish this year. It's currently with the publisher for review, which are related to the fact that human behavior is emanating from a complex system, the human. And so if you look at what the problem is here, first of all, machine learning models require ergodicity, because the samples must be assumed to be drawn from a representative distribution. So if you want to train a complex system, you need to have a representative distribution, because next time you draw a sample, if it doesn't come from the distribution which you used to train, the model will fail because of reason number 4. However, reason number 1 on the right-hand side says that complex systems create non-ergodic distributions. And so when you make a photo, so to speak, from complex system behavior derived situation, this photograph in quote marks is basically always skewed. That's the most important thing you have to learn today. So when you record human behavior, this behavior is never representative, so in other words, there is no multivariate distribution to draw from, because each situation is new. And the samples that you can draw are always outdated. So what you do is you train with this skewed snap when you sample from a complex system. So the sample space is always sparse, a priori. That's really bad for complex systems, and that's bad for ML algorithms. They cannot deal with this. They need repetitive patterns. Of course, then this is really the take-home message number one, that if you have a situation or an environment created by a complex system, then this is always a non-ergodic distribution deriving from a non-ergodic process. And such a distribution can never be representative. So also they don't have evolutionary property. They cannot model evolutionary properties because they model a fixed input-output relationship. But when you have evolutionary properties, input-output relationships change all the time. Because they are differentiable models, they cannot model non-continuous operators or functionals. And also they can, of course, not model non-isotropic forces. They cannot model element-specific interaction types. And also force overlay or interaction is very hard to model. So for them, and also they cannot model drivenness, which is energy dissipation. To give you a very simple example why this doesn't work, we haven't found any way to model the flow of water into, for example, water reservoirs. So turbulence. Turbulence is one of the most simplest natural phenomena of drivenness, because the energy from the water flow dissipates in the reservoir into which the water is flowing, but we cannot model it. And so we cannot model how the energy that is the kinetic energy of the water distributes into the reservoir. And also complex systems cannot model context-free machine learning models cannot model contextuality, because complex systems are always contextual, but machine learning models are always context-free. And so you have a discrepancy between the context-freeness of the machine learning model and the contextuality of the complex system. So this is in very, I don't know how long I spoke, maybe 15 minutes, in very short words. That's what complex systems, the problem with complex systems modeling in machine learning. Hello,
okay,
are you still there?
I'm still here. So now the students are required to challenge you.
I have a question.
Yes.
So the issues raised here were the problems of modeling complex systems in the context of neural networks and deep learning.
Machine learning.
Machine learning, all right. But the thing is, humans also haven't been able to model turbulence. And humans haven't been able to, so to an extent, we've been able to model weather forecast systems. So we use certain sets of differential equations there. But if ML systems can, to a certain extent, as was mentioned in the slides, auto-parameterized differential equations, model some extent of that, then why should it be considered a sign of no intelligence, even though humans have also not been able to do the same thing? So why this requirement from machine learning?
So I'm not saying that it is a sign of intelligence. So now we are not talking about intelligence right now. We are only talking about what can be modeled with machines. And what I've not said is, I've skipped a little bit of content. So what I've not said is that all the phenomena that are complex in nature can't be modeled using mathematics. So of course we cannot model complex systems mathematically. And so, but that's not because we are not intelligent, but because complex system modeling seems to be beyond the hardware that human intelligence possesses. So, but that doesn't mean that humans are not intelligent. It just means that we can't model. There's no way to model complex systems, neither with paper and pen mathematics, nor with whatever kind of algorithm. And so there, but that doesn't mean that we are not intelligent. It just means that this is beyond our modeling capabilities. But this taken aside, when it comes to creating ML models, and we want to model our, or let's say, animal intelligence, then we would have to model the output of a complex system, which not even humans can, let alone machines.
Okay. All right, but at least humans have been able to approximate certain complex systems like weather forecast systems.
So yes, so that's
so.
Go ahead.
So my question then would be, what do you think of the potential for machine learning systems to approximate rather than create an exact model?
So a very good question. So weather forecast models are approximative machine learning models, right? So many of them are built using machine learning. So of course, it's possible to approximate certain complex phenomena using machine learning, but it's quite limited what you can achieve. Yeah, you can achieve some. The question is always how good is the approximation and what can you technically do with it? And so if you look at the technosphere we have, all the technical gadgets that surround us that make our life so much easier and better, most of them are exact. So mobile phones are exact, bridges are exact, trains are exact, airplanes are exact, cars are exact. So we don't have so many approximative models in the technosphere. So Google advertisement placing is approximative, but why can Google afford it? Because nobody gets killed if I get shown a female lipstick ad, right? So nobody gets killed if I show a lipstick ad, so they can afford to do it. But if they would use these algorithms in intensive care unit machinery, they would kill people. So that's the point. The point is approximative modeling is fine, but you have to decide in practice for what purposes you can use it and where you can't use it.
Right. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Very good question. Thank you very much.
Any more questions? So I guess I'll try. So if you take we used this example already a couple of times. If you take a laptop and throw it into a river, then the laptop no longer behaves in such a way that it is a simple system. It starts to decay, and that's because the laptop plus the river is a complex system. Is that a correct account?
Well, I mean the system as a whole. So when the laptop drops into the river or creek or whatever, the creek has mechanical energy in the water, and this mechanical energy will start to attack the structure of the laptop, and then of course chemical processes that are not in equilibrium because the water is driven will also attack the laptop. So the laptop, in a way, will become part of a complex system. But on its own, it will not be a complex system. So if you take it out and those forces stop working on it, then it will stay in a more or less in a certain form of decay. Although in the long term, even if you leave a laptop standing somewhere without water, it will also be part of a complex system because there will also be energy working on it, but much less so. So if it's in a building, to begin with, it will take 100 or 200 years before the building is broken, and then energy can really work on the laptop. So
can you go back to slide 2?
Yes.
So you give C. elegans as an example of a complex system. I assume you would give a human being as an example of a complex system.
Yeah,
also.
of course. Yes.
Now, but can you tell me how a human being has evolutionary properties?
Yes. So the evolutionary properties of living organisms come from the fact that that new types of macromolecules can be created in adult organisms. So if you have an adult organism, by its ability to react to the environment, it can create new types of macromolecules that it hasn't had before, like new memories and or new combinations of elements. And that's all. It can actually change the way it methylates its DNA, and therefore change the way the inheritance will work if it becomes progenitor of new organisms. So this is the way that new elements and element interactions can arise in adult organisms.
Good. Okay, any more questions from anybody?
Yes, I will have one. I believe it's a very boring, usual philosophical question, but when we say that complex systems are not, we don't have a mathematical modeling for them, is this correct?
Yes.
Is this intended to be one of our epistemic lacks, or something which happens in nature unregarded of some very, very complex mathematical model, which at the moment we don't have? But
this is a very good question. So we don't know this, so we can't really give an answer to this question. It would be speculative. However, my view is that our ability for mathematical modeling is an evolutionary adaptation of humans. So very much like language is the way our hands work are evolutionary adaptations. And it is a special evolutionary adaptation of our mind, the extent of which also strongly varies between individuals. So there are only, out of 1,000, only 1 or 2 individuals are usually mathematically gifted. And so it has a high variance, but everybody with an IQ above 80 can count. And this skill is limited, and I think it's limited by the forces that shaped it during evolution. And so I think that certain aspects of nature are just too much, so to speak, for the structure of this skill. And this seems very plausible given the history of mathematics so far. However, because in the end, all the mathematical objects that we know can be reduced to numbers, and so and are very complicated combinations of them. So even, for example, if the invention of calculus by Newton and Leibniz seems like a very big step, the way they did it was quite geometrical. And great inventions are always great, but it's still linked, of course, to the history of mathematics. So I don't think that we will ever be able to fully model complex systems, but we will be able to some extent to, of course, approximatively model aspects of them. So in other words, I think the structural deficit.
Yes, thank you.
I also have another question.
Yes.
So if we consider the fact that how mathematics have evolved so far, and also the fact that mathematical modeling has, up to a point, tried to represent in a way the randomness that might be an attribute or of these complex systems. So we have already find out some mathematical ways through statistics and stochastic processes in order to study randomness.
Yeah, of course.
And so do you think that this is like a big step, a small step to accomplish something even bigger in the future? Because up until a point, we also thought that randomness was something that we couldn't even explain, and now we can computationally.
That's not fully true. For example, there is no mathematical model for a true natural number generator, a random number generator. So a true random number generator, which produces true random events, can only be constructed by using a physical device. Namely, normally one uses a Geiger counter, which is counting radioactive decay events, because they are truly random. So we cannot simulate randomness. Of course, we can model certain aspects of randomness, and this we can do since a couple of 100 years. And at the end of the 18th century, we have started to understand how calculus can be applied to this. But the way that we model randomness only applies to classical Newtonian systems. And when we get out of Newtonian systems, there are actually no examples to convincingly model a complex system behavior. So there are, of course, like one of your colleagues mentioned, approximative models of randomness, such as or stochastic behavior, such as weather forecasting, but they have a very short-term forecast window, and they are not very, depending on in which landscape you are, they almost don't work at all. So near the sea or in the mountains, they almost do not work. And basically, they work for regular continental climate with strong determinants over very short durations. And so the fact that we have probability theory doesn't really help with complex systems. Turbulence, which I already mentioned, is a very good example, because the mathematician who had found the best way so far of dealing with turbulence was actually probabilistic theoretician. It was Kolmogorov, who invented the Kolmogorov-Smirnov theorem. One of the greatest mathematical geniuses of the 20th century. In the 1940s, he tried to model turbulence. And while his model is, you can see it when our book will appear, it's explained in the book, while his model is very aesthetically highly valuable, it's very beautiful, it fails to model the reality of turbulence. And so there is no example for exact modeling or good approximative modeling of complex systems. And I don't know, it's actually, if you know how this whole theory of probability works, how the distribution are approximated, that it's already very, very hard actually to figure out, or mathematically impossible to calculate, mixed high-dimensional distributions. You will see that this is very, very far away. I don't believe it's possible.
Okay, thank you for your...
Okay, I think we'll have Jobst continue now for a bit.
So now we look at intelligence, and you will see in the course of the second part why we needed to talk about complex systems. So this here, what you see is a standard definition of the artificial general intelligence community of intelligence. And this is, so they have a verbal definition which goes, intelligence measures an agent's ability to achieve goals in a wide range of environments. That's the standard definition that everybody accepts. So this ability to achieve goals is defined by a utility function. And this utility is here V of an agent pi, depending on the environment of the agent's mu. And it's defined as the expectation of the sum of the rewards the agent is going to have, which is actually normed to be equal less to 1. And so mu is a binary description of the environment of the agent. And this environment may be a fired abstract structure that is manipulated inside a computer. For example, if you have a theorem prover, then this is would be one environment. Or it may relate to something in the physical world. For example, a nuclear power station that has broken down and where you now want to clean up the nuclear power station with a robot, because it's not an environment where we would like to use humans. And by the way, there's a great documentation about Chernobyl. They tried to use robots, but the problem was that the transistors broke immediately because the radiation was too strong. So the radiation destroyed the transistors inside the robots, and then they stopped working. So they had to use humans after all. And in either case, no matter whether it's a physical scenario or a artificial one, this vector takes a form of a binary string, and it's a description which plays a role in the Hutter model. And E is the expectation of the rewards. And what is a reward? We will see it on the next slide. So this is the basic definition. Now, first of all, let's consider that this definition is actually mathematically broken, which I find kind of sad, because they should at least get this right. But basically, this is really accepted in the AGI community. Now, one has to see that the AGI community is made up mainly by computer scientists and not by mathematicians. And computer scientists, like physicists and engineers, they tend to not look so carefully at mathematical equations. But actually, the definition of expectation is the sum of a variable, which is actually multiplied by the probability of this variable for each step. So if you have a finite amount of steps, or here it's actually even infinite, but doesn't matter if you have some steps, you should calculate the reward of the variable by summing the product of the probability with the variable, which is the reward. And here they don't do this. They actually take the expectation of that is already summed up. So it's funny, because if you wanted to implement this, it's actually not implementable because mathematically wrong, which I found quite interesting. so in other words, the operator E of the expectation has to be applied not to the sum of the values of a random variable, but directly to the values of the variable, as shown here in this equation. And otherwise, you cannot take account of the norming denominator. So pi I is smaller than 1, and therefore it's a denominator, right? If you multiply by a number smaller than 1, it's the same as dividing by this number. And so usually you need a denominator, and if you don't have a denominator, you cannot get the sum below 1, of course. because I mean, this is just mathematically silly. But they've published it, and the reviewers have accepted it, and it gets cited hundreds and hundreds of times. I'm astonished. But anyhow, a lot of crap gets cited a lot, so it seems to be human nature. But it's still remarkable that nobody has criticized this. Taking this aside, and just ignoring the definition problems and imagining they had used the proper definition of expectation, which is actually you can read up in any very basic textbook of statistics. So I don't really, I mean, actually it's cool when you learn to calculate the probability of throwing the number 7 with 2 dice. You learn this. So I was kind of astonished. Anyhow, in simplified terms, when we ignore this, the equation 1 says that an agent pi reacting to environment description mu obtains a finite reward, which corresponds to the expectation of reward it achieves over all the steps it undertakes. So, and actually the higher this is, the better the utility. And so Barry asked me to insert something about reward. Of course, the reward here has no meaning for the machine. The machine is just a calculating machine. It's a Turing machine. It can just, you know, how can I say this? Apply amounts of electricity to certain circuits. But by doing this, so reward has no meaning for the machine. That's just a mathematical concept to express an optimization problem. So this here, how can I maximize the utility? The way I can maximize this utility by doing something with this reward variable, and that's all it says. Yeah. So reward doesn't mean what is reward for you, so that I invite you to a good beer in the evening, or anything, or bring you some flowers or so. What humans experience as reward, it's just a way of formulating the mathematical optimization problem. Okay, so on the next slide, what do they do with this utility? So here you can see this utility term again, but now it is in a bigger equation which defines intelligence. And this uppercase epsilon, it's a mathematical uppercase epsilon as a function of the agent, is defined as the sum of the utility multiplied with another factor. And what is this factor? So this factor contains k, which is a Kolmogorov complexity function. So we already heard about Kolmogorov. He did not only work on probability distributions, but also on information theory, and the complexity function. He invented it, and it's indicating the complexity of the algorithm executed by the agent pi to represent the environment mu. So it's basically how many calculation steps I need to represent mu. And as you can see, this is a negative exponent. So that means that this is a penalizing factor. So the more steps I need, the more complex my representation algorithm is, the lower the intelligence will be. And that's pretty, I think, acceptable, because so if you imagine a more intelligent individual will find it easier to achieve a goal than a stupid individual. So of course, you know this from everyday life. And so this says something similar. It says, so if you have a high utility for a given environment, but I needed 1 million steps to achieve it, then I'm less intelligent than somebody who achieved the same utility with a shorter number of steps. So furthermore, a couple of more remarks. So mu is the environment. What is uppercase U? Uppercase U is a set of environment descriptions that the machine can process. So so for example, if the machine is the AlphaGo machine, then all the situations are settings on the Go board and nothing more. But of course, an AGI agent would be able, hopefully, to process more different situations. That at least what they hope. And so U is just a set of environments the agent could, in theory, be processing. Let me give you an example from the animal kingdom. So, for example, a rat has quite a huge set U, because a rat can adapt to very many environments, and therefore it is also to be found all around the globe almost. Not in the Antarctic and not in the Sahara, I believe, but in many, many moderate environments, the rat is to be found. Whereas other animals are very specialized and are only found in certain environments. And this is what this uppercase U is supposed to say. So, so basically, the definition of intelligence is chosen to yield the most efficient possible algorithm to achieve a certain utility. Also, the summation over all environments prevents a random hit. So because you have to perform this in many environments, you can guarantee that the equation doesn't give you a distorted outcome. So if the definition of the utility function would be mathematically sound, which you could easily do by replacing it with this, then the entire equation would mathematically make sense. So it is a proper definition of a weighted utility function. That's what it basically is. Before we take apart these two equations, now I've just criticized them from a mathematical point of view. Are there any questions regarding the two equations before I continue dissecting them?
I have two questions when I was looking at these formulas. So I was just looking at V as the author says, ability to achieve the value, the capital V. But then in the formula on the second slide, on this one, yeah. So why is Kogomolov complexity function as exponential, and the V is just like linear?
Because it's just, look, it's just a negative exponent, so it means you just divide. This means 1 divided by 2 exponent k. So this is just used to actually penalize the utility.
Yeah, but it's it's why didn't they just penalize with the inverse value? Why did they choose the exponential growth?
Oh,
to make it convergent, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I haven't thought about it, but it's basically the way that the Kolmogorov complexity function always gets applied in theoretical informatics. So okay. This form is, so when you read a textbook of theoretical informatics, you always see it represented like this, so that you get a smooth representation of the entire function. So it's I think it works pretty well to weigh the whatever you want to weigh by the amount of work that you need to put in to obtain it. That's
they argue that extensively in the paper anyway. But the second question is this capital U, the set of environment descriptions. How is this supposed to be interpreted? Because it's written as a sum, but I would take that in general this is like a manifold in the best case, or it's
so it's a sum over the elements of a set. That's fine mathematically. So you have this is just an index of all the possible terms you can get. Okay, and let's say you would have 3 different environments. Then
what if it has a ball or a sphere of different environments? So you just integrate?
No, I don't think so, because you basically can always. This is theoretical informatics, so that means that you can, no matter what, from a function analysis point of view, no matter what is the way the environments are, they are always compressed into binary vectors, and then you can just create a series of binary vectors. Or a set of binary vectors, and this is just one binary vectors out of the set. So it's a countable set of binary vectors, no matter what.
Maybe
okay.
Maybe you should explain what a binary vector is.
Yeah, so for the non-mathematicians, it's just a vector of ones and zeros. So remember that a Turing machine can only deal with ones and zeros. It's like a big tape on which you can write ones and zeros and can change the ones and zeros. And this is basically this is from the perspective of theoretical informatics. It's just a set of such binary vectors.
Sorry, I think it would have been a bit more helpful if the input and output spaces were also defined, because now it's clear to me so the inputs are basically strings, as far as I understand it. Is it? Or because
yeah, so you are
otherwise the mu is a bit hard to interpret.
Yeah, the mu. Yeah, you're right. So I've not defined. Actually, it's interesting why. I've just copied the definition from their paper, but you're right. They don't even usually one would have to use a function analysis type of definition of the input space and the output.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
And I could easily have done this, but there are two reasons why I think they didn't do it for sloppiness, and I didn't do it because it's just too implicit for me, because it's what I do all the time. But thank you. I think we should add this next time. It's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyhow, this is a definition. Now let's move on and look at the problem. So first of all, there is a verbose definition before the equation, which says intelligence measures an agent's ability to achieve goals in a wide range of environments. So first of all, the definition captures just one part of one of the standard definitions of primal intelligence. So primal intelligence says that you have to adapt to new environments suddenly and without being trained upfront. So you have to be spontaneously able to adapt to a new environment suddenly, quickly. And this definition just captures the adaptation. Now, what is more important is that the definition is very broad, because it allows also this organism, Caenorhabditis elegans, a small worm that is 1 millimeter long and has 1,000 cells and only 300 neurons, to be intelligent, because what it can do, it can forage and reproduce in complex environments. So it can live in fruit, in vegetables, in mushrooms, in soil, and so on. It can use snails and slugs as migration vectors. So it can really live in many environments, and it can also reproduce there. So I think it would be intelligent according to the AGI definition, and even probably the amoeba here. This is a nice amoeba. It's called Chaos carolinensis, because it never has the same shape. Yeah, here's just a drawing of it, but in the next second it will look different, because it moves around by changing its shape, and it can also live in many environments. Yeah, and thrive wonderfully there. It can reproduce. It can find food, but it's just one cell. Yeah. So it's one of the most primitive. Well, it's the most primitive eukaryote is yeast, but directly next to yeast comes already this amoeba, and it would also be intelligent in this definition. So I think the definition of intelligence is too weak. Why is it so weak? Because in the book where this intelligence definition is used, that's the book by Goetze and Penachem, which is called Artificial General Intelligence. They discuss many other definitions, but the problem is that if they use definition like the one, very simple one of human intelligence is the capability that enables us to speak, for example, yeah, that enables the language that humans can use. I mean, it's not my definition, but if you would, but they propose this definition, then they would automatically fail in generating artificial intelligence. So they've basically chosen a definition that doesn't yield intelligence, so that they claim now that they have an intelligent machine, but they've actually on purpose used a very stupid definition that is not intelligence. Now let's go and look at let me look what time it is. Yeah, and look at other problems of the AGI definition. So let's first look at perception. So if you have this vector mu as a measure of complexity of environments, this vector mu presupposes that the environment can be represented by using a binary vector. in some artificial environments, such a binary representation may be adequate, but in natural environments, we have signals emanating from complex systems, and therefore, the systems, these signals need to be actively interpreted and reassessed all the time. And also the observation needs to be continuously adapted to the input as the agent takes account of the interpretation of each antecedent observation. And also in animals, this interpretation depends on previously experienced mental material, so memories. And for example, this tiger observing the prey, it does actually all the time update its observations. It does active perception, or it's I think a female tiger. And if there would be a puppet next to a young tiger, the young tiger would not be as good at observing those animals, those prey animals, because it has less experience. So the experience stored in the memory of the tiger also helps it to react better to what the animals are doing and to single out, for example, one animal to hunt it down. So the predator, if the predator is just sitting there and observing the prey, it's already acting to improve and adapt the perception of the prey. So perception is not static, but a dynamic process of constant iterative feedback loops between sensory and motor neuronal circuits, and we cannot even know. So if we think of training an ML algorithm, we need to know the tuples that we use to train, but we don't even know when the cycle begins and ends. So the cycles can be very fast, and we don't know because we can only observe the overall behavior, but we don't know how to determine the tuples that constitute the perception process. Or J.J. Gibson, a very important psychologist and philosopher, says normal activity of perception is to explore the world. So perception depends on more than just sensory stimulus. So the view that perception is just a result of sensory stimulus is completely outdated. So when we give input to computers, it's just sensory input, but that's not real. That's not perception. Perception requires purposeful activity, direct manipulation of the object, and innate or acquired knowledge of the expected patterns of reality. So I need categorical, predefined ability to deal with the environment, and also acquired knowledge. And this manipulation actually of the object doesn't mean that I need to touch them, but the tiger can also manipulate these animals, the prey animals, in her imagination. So she can imagine that maybe this animal would now lean down to drink from water source, and whether then maybe it would be a good moment to attack this animal, and so on. So this is highly interactive, and mu, this static vector mu, which basically models, for example, the input from a sensor, doesn't capture any of this. Does not capture any of what I've just said about perception, what we know about animal and human perception. Here's another example of perception, which is much more complex than this one, because it involves dialogue, and it involves observation of a dialogue. It involves probably, yeah, it has many interesting aspects that show how complicated perception is. And so for example, what does Tony Curtis, who is here acting as a woman, think about Marilyn Monroe in this moment? We don't know, but it's certainly an interesting question. And anyhow, so perception is not modeled by this environment variable mu. On the next slide, we see the next problem, which is activity. So the steps of the utility function that you've seen here are results of, so each step is an activity which yields a reward. So in chess or in Go, you get a reward for making a certain move. Now, the steps of the utility function that are described by the Hutter definition of artificial intelligence, there are a linear sequence of discrete machine actions. But human motor acts are actually interactions of perception and motor activity. They involve at every stage a dense synergy of multiple body systems at multiple levels of granularity. And that's, for example, if you think of human manufacturing activities, where they have to use, like surgery, when you have to actually feel very exactly what you're doing, or in certain steps in the construction of even of cars. Feinmotorik, it's called in German. Barry, do you know the word in English?
I don't. Sorry. Precision engineering would be.
Yeah, yeah, probably. So we don't know how to make machines do this, because we don't know how the circuitry between a perception and motor action works. So we know that there is some feedback loop, blah, 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 but we don't know the details of it. And if you look at the most advanced textbooks or papers that are available about animal fine motor action, we have no clue how the animals do these fine motor actions, or know how we do it. We have no models for it. And so because we have no models for it, we cannot do it in a computer. And so the activities that happen in real environments are much more complicated than this linear sequence of steps. And the interaction between sensory and motory activity could potentially be described as a linear sequence of afferent, and intra-CNS neuronal signal events, but the coupling of such a sequence to any sort of reward is very indirect. So yes, in reality, of course, those things happen one after the other, but very, very quickly in a very complex fashion. And so we don't know how to couple this to reward. And so probably the sequence in reward terms that we need would probably not be possible to construct the correct reward sequence. Another aspect is that mammals can overcome massive negative rewards to achieve a goal. So, I mean, here I have an example from animal psychology. So it's a cocaine self-administration experiments where the rats, to get cocaine, they have to traverse a heated plate, which is burning their feet. So they have to damage themselves to get to the cocaine, but they still do it because they have primal intelligence, so they know that they must cross the heat plate to get to the cocaine, that they must press a button to get the administration of cocaine. They even and they get a short-term reward for this, but they don't have a net long-term reward. And so such a behavior is very, very hard to model with a reward function. And if you think, many of you are maybe in the middle of their PhD thesis. So the PhD thesis process is not like this cocaine self-administration, but there's a lot of negative stuff you have to cope with over a long time before you get a reward. That's for sure. And I don't know how this could be modeled with such a reward model. It would at least be very hard. Speaking of reward, so what is even more important is that the reward pattern that we see, the sum of a reward, it is actually unable to model the reward patterns that we encounter in real life. Because first of all, the system that satisfies the Hutter definition will always be situation specific. So it will work only in the context where a human has already been at work in preparing appropriate rewards. So there is no general or universal reward. So the reward, for example, that the machine receives for playing the game of Go are points. And the algorithm is trying to find a functional or an operator that maximizes the number of points. So it's just a derivative of a very long equation that you have to find. And that has nothing to do with universal or general intelligence. The reason is that the mathematical definition that Hutter provides for the environment mu, that must be matched by the reward. So it's not possible to find a reward that works for all environments. Whereas humans have as a reward, the main rewards are to survive and to reproduce. And survival and reproduction can come very indirectly in highly evolved societies. So to sit in a room and do mathematical equations all day long for survival and reproduction, that's quite abstract, or to do paintings of art or to compose music. And so there is a way of humans to delay the reward of reproduction and survival very far off, and to do activities that seem to be non-connected to it. And that seems to be at least required for objectifying intelligence, so human intelligence. And we don't know how we can model this with reward. Also, further problem arises that the assumption is made that all rewards of one agent must be of the same type for every step under a given environment. So if we go back to the equation, R is only indexed by the step, but it cannot change its type, otherwise it would need a second index. So basically so there's only one type. Yes, this type can obtain different values, but probably in animal and human behavior, there are many different types of rewards. So, and we cannot model this. Then the question is, couldn't we create a sequence of rewards adequate for learning the behavior of a complex system? So the problem here would be that such a reward sequence, so you would then imagine many rewards in a sequence, and they would have to give situation-specific rewards. And that's because each step on a complex system model trajectory would have to be able to deal with an unexpected situation. Because when the AI system interacts with its own environment, that will change the environment. And so this change of the environment will create an unexpected situation and may require different reward. So you cannot predefine a reward path or trajectory, because at each step, a different reward would be needed to correspond to the emanations from the complex systems that form the environment. So that has to do with the evolutionary character of complex systems. And such a temporal reward sequence would obviously not follow a Markovian pattern. And of course, so speaking of probability theory, if we go back to this slide here, Markovian pattern is of course a pattern that applies only to classical Newtonian systems. Only Newtonian systems have the Markov property. Complex systems don't have the Markov property, but without the Markov property, you cannot achieve predictive modeling in stochastic equations. So stochastic differential equations or other stochastic process models, they always need a Markov pattern. And without the Markov pattern, in which the reward would depend only on the previous or some previous steps. But if you don't have this pattern, but you have a dependency on many earlier steps and long-term dispositions of the organism and also short-term intentions, you can't find a reward sequence. And so therefore, the reward sequence would need to correspond to complex emanations relating to situations varying as the successive steps unfold. And therefore, the reward sequence would itself have to be complex. And thereby it would have all the properties of a complex system emanation. So that's the interesting thing, that to give rewards to an intelligent system in a complex setting, the reward sequence itself would have all the properties of a complex system emanation. So it would have the same properties that my stream of language that I'm currently giving to you has. And we have no mathematical models to create such sequences because we have no mathematical models for complex system emanations. And so we couldn't create the reward sequence that would be needed for the intelligent system to cope with the complex system situation. And that's a problem, I think, a very important problem to see this, that the reward approach, while reward is mathematically attractive because it allows to state the intelligence problem like an optimization problem for optimization theory, it doesn't create a realistic sequence of rewards that corresponds in any way to what we experience or animals experience when they obtain rewards for their behavior. Actually, the reward that an foraging animal receives, which is the food, and for which the animal does very interesting things. So if you read modern books about foraging, it has been found out that parrots, for example, invent new patterns of shouts and noises, vocal noises they make to describe sources for food. why they do this, why they search for those food sources, which they have to do every day, they create those sound patterns, and this process is highly complex, and it has nothing to do with the way they get to the reward and so on has nothing to do at all with linear reward sequence that we see in those models. And so that's why I call these pseudo definitions of intelligence, because they just define something that can be actually put into a model optimization algorithm, usually numerical model optimization algorithm, like a dual or something like this, but in reality it has nothing to do with real intelligence, not even animal intelligence. Now, I think before I go to the last slide, I would like to give you the opportunity to ask one more round of questions.
Yeah, I have one question, Professor.
Please.
The thing is, so here the argument is that the reward sequence is extremely complex, and since it is not Markovian, you cannot somehow model this. Now, if I were to take the example of a robot in a factory, let's say a robot that knows how to load boxes, unload boxes, get the boxes onto some other conveyor belt, etc., etc. Currently, there are reinforcement learning algorithms that are able to do this pretty effectively in these factories, just replacing entirely with robots that do this work.
Yes.
So there, of course, the reward sequence is very clear because you have just one mechanistic task that you keep doing throughout your life, well, throughout your robot life. My question here was, what if we could create a set of rewards for different tasks and model that together into a specific robot? So for example, let's say loading, unloading boxes, opening doors, walking, sitting down, different movements. Now, I'm not suggesting for a single second that humans learn this by this sort of discretized reward sequence. I'm not suggesting this at all because I don't know how humans learn it. But as far as teaching robots that is concerned, don't you think the reward sequence then would just be a set of different rewards for different tasks, but they would all be modeled into the same algorithm? So in a sense, what I'm arguing is the whole is the sum of its parts. That's what I'm trying to say.
So what you are actually already giving a small preview of the next slide. So it's clever what you're saying. So basically what you describe is, of course, that what is a factory? A factory is a Newtonian system. Yeah, so a factory has all those properties, and so therefore machine learning can be very, very efficient in implicitly modeling Newtonian equations, motion equations, also sensory equations. So therefore, you can, because in a factory, all processes have the Markov property, and because there's no force overlay, the elements are well defined, and so on. That will work pretty well, and that's why also machine learning is I think the best application of machine learning that is currently not visible very much is actually manufacturing and mining and other mechanical activities where humans still play a role, but where they will, with the exception of this fine motor sensorical behavior, which is very hard to model, they will replace robots. They will be replaced by robots more and more. You are completely right, and that's because here machine learning is used to model Newtonian systems. That's the first answer. The second answer is that it's essentially the way to build AI properly is to do it as you described. And I will come to this once the other questions are answered.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah.
If there are any.
I have one, but I'll give the students a chance to butt in first.
I would just remark maybe that the authors were aware of this argument that you are saying, because they say that at no point they are trying to compare their definition to human intelligence. So yes. I think they perceive the machine intelligence just as a compositum of different tasks, as Ravidi was saying earlier.
If you read Hutter's and Schmidhuber's papers about general intelligence, I disagree. They believe that they can create a general intelligence, and many of them, I don't know whether Schmidhuber does, but many of them also believe in the singularity, and which I think is shows. I think that, I mean, you should really get this AGI book, or I can send it to you, or Barry can send it to you. This AGI book by let me look again, by Goetze and Penachin, which is one of the most important consensus readers, where all the big shots of AGI have published papers. And there, I think yes, of course, they say that is not human intelligence, but they say it's a real intelligence. But what I'm saying is no, what you're suggesting is not a real intelligence, but it's just a kind of amoeba intelligence, and probably not even that. So I think that because on the next slide you will see how I define what one can do with AI, and when I show this to people from this community, I get heavily attacked. Oh, that's old school. We can do much better. We can do general intelligence and so on. So I don't know, but
they were, I mean, if I understood correctly, they were also saying, you know, that of course the Chinese room argument is completely right. When I was, I think where they were defending the critique, maybe that's at the
but
end.
I'm not even, but I don't even argue with the Chinese room argument here. I just say that basically even the most basic form of intelligence that we as humans perceive as intelligent, which is the behavior of a dog or another mammal, that this behavior cannot never be achieved by these equations. So what can be achieved by these equations is actually what neural networks already do, and that is because this here is a recipe to actually it's function. Yeah, and so loss function minimizes loss, and here we maximize reward, but it's basically an optimization prescription, and we achieve this by applying these models. We achieve what is shown on slide 3 with all the pros and cons. Now I'm saying that these ML models are very useful, but they have nothing to do with intelligence, and that's basically I call it. I mean, when I discuss, you know, that I have an AI company, when I discuss with clever customers, I mean, there are customers who want to buy intelligence, and I let them under the illusion, but others who are clever, they say, but that's not really intelligence. I say, no, these are artificial instincts. These are just, and this is basically what we do, what we still do, even if we use such optimization procedures as those described by these models here, we still only obtain a narrow AI. And with this, Barry, you had a question before I go to the narrow AI.
Yes, so I have a number of questions now, unfortunately. So what would Legg-Hutter say to the following objection? You define intelligence as the ability to achieve rewards in a wide range of environments, but AlphaGo can only achieve rewards in one kind of environment, which is the Go board.
Yeah.
So it's not a wide range at all.
Yeah. So I believe that even actually you're right. So I believe that even this definition, intelligence, so will not be achievable. So the verbal definition is actually in conflict with the equations.
Yeah,
you're right.
And now, can you
just a little correction? Sorry, just a little correction. The Alpha Zero actually can succeed in a variety of game environments. It can play chess. It can play Go. It can play checkers.
I'm just talking about AlphaGo.
You're right.
Not AlphaGo, but Alpha Zero, which was recently released.
Yeah, Alpha Zero can play different games. And actually, there was already in 2014 a precursor of Alpha Zero, which could play all the Atari games, which was also trained with reward learning. It just couldn't play the strategic games, but it could play Pong and all the ones that give you a series of points.
But now OpenAI has come out with StarCraft games too, so they are getting better at these complex environments.
Well, these actually not complex environments. So these are still Newtonian environments.
Okay.
The reason, this is very important, Barry, if you could hold on with your questions a minute. So the reason why these are Newtonian environments is that also, for example, games like strategy games like Civilization, they have also been beat by reinforcement learning. But the reason is, of course, what is Civilization? Civilization is a set of rules and equations applied to a certain pattern. And even if this pattern is created by random, it's created as a multivariate random distribution, usually multivariate.
Right.
And so it's multivariate Gaussian. And then, of course, you can take points from this distribution and put them into a set of rules. Then you create a very complex set of events, but it's still a Newtonian universe. And therefore, you can also train, and the same applies for the ego shooter games. And therefore, you can train AI that is beating this. But the point is, since 1950, we have heard predictions about free moving robots. Why don't we have them? I mean, we have them, of course, in controlled environments, but why do we never encounter free moving robots in our streets? Because these are real complex environments.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. I just have one quick question for anybody. So why do they use the word universal in the title of the Legg-Hutter paper?
Because it sounds good.
All right. Okay, that's what I guessed the answer would be.
Okay. I'm not sure, Jobst. Am I wrong? Please correct me.
Probably. I mean, there's a wonderful paper by Ioannidis from 2005 which says why most of scientific research results are wrong. And the biggest reason is, of course, bias, and sounding good is also a form of bias. So anyhow, but I'm not a pessimist for AI. Remember that I make my living from AI.
Jobst, we have one student, Peter Bottaroni, who would like to ask a question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Actually, there are two questions. The first is related with the discussion with Riddi, in the sense, okay, then we say that a complex environment is an environment that is not we cannot model mathematically, right?
Yes, basically, yes.
Okay, then every complex environment cannot be something that we create with a software. Then a complex environment should be a real environment, in the sense that everything that is, even the more complex game that we can play is not considered a complex environment, right?
Unless what we sometimes have is that we have natural human behavior integrated as movies into an environment, into a game. And then the player in some strategy games, which I used to play 20 years ago, there was a movie sequence in the game embedded, and you had to interpret the movie scene correctly to continue to play the game. And of course, the behavior of humans during that scene, because this was a film of naturally behaving humans, where they were playing a role, but still, that was, of course, complex system behavior. But then the rest of the game was not. And that's still like this.
Poker would be a complex game, would it not?
Poker. Oh, yes. Poker played with humans is a complex game.
Which one? Sorry?
If you play a round of poker against human opponents.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
But
go ahead with your question.
Chess with human opponents is not a complex game.
Correct.
Yeah, good.
And the second question is related with the reward definition, in the sense that, at least to me, it seems that we define the rewards with something that is given. We define the reward for the robot or for the machine.
Yes.
But actually, the human sometimes creates some reward or some goal by himself, maybe some sub goal or sub reward in order to achieve a bigger goal. Is
Correct.
it possible that to model this creation of intermediate goal or final goal in as a machine, according to you?
Yes, so it has already been done. So you can, for example, you can have, as you know, you can have meta models in machine learning. So you can have, for example, several reinforcement learning models that use different reinforcement rewards from a choice of reward. And so you can optimize from a certain reward. You can try out several reward types in parallel and find the best model by varying the reward type. And then you can use adversarial learning maybe to drive the choice of the reward type and so on. Yeah, so there are ways to do this, but they will always only solve problems in non-complex environments.
Okay. Thank you.
Good. Now last slide. So you remember that I'm making money with AI, and I'm a big fan of AI. It's not that I'm negative against it. Yeah. So what can we do with the analytical engine? So the analytical engine is the first name that was given to a Turing machine. Charles Babbage was the one who built the first computer in the 19th century, around 1850, and it could already do computations. And Ada Lovelace said that that an analytical engine has no pretensions to originate anything. It can only do whatever we know how to order it to perform. And so what is that also true for the Turing machine? So Alan Turing says that, of course, an analytical engine is a Turing machine. And what can we do with it? And so I think we can do a lot. And we can do what one of you just said, namely we can engineer by composition. So that's an outcome that we want to achieve. And here you see many operators and functionals which are chained together. These are an uppercase data as an operator and a lowercase data as a functional. For the non-mathematicians, a functional is a relation that takes an input vector and creates an output number. The operator can also create an output vector from an input vector. And so they are act together here in a chain to yield the final result, which is Y or T hat. And the superscripts that you can see here, theta, kappa, lambda, they are prior knowledge that can be configured into the functions and operators explicitly or via training tuples. So for example, this could be just a set of rules. And this could be the parameterization of the rules. This could be a function that has been trained like a spam filter, and where the parameter indicates which training tuples were used. And so I believe that it's very important that you make the prior knowledge that you gave to the machine explicit. So either you make it explicit if you have, for example, mechanical theorem proving component, like let's say this one here would be or maybe this one would be a mechanical theorem prover. Then you need some axioms for the mechanical theorem prover. And those axioms are its configuration, and you need to know which axioms you give to it so that you know how it will behave. Or this would be a functional. Now the functional, of course, is trained by using training tuples and other meta parameters. They are this. And also those you have to know pretty well. So for example, we do customer correspondence automation, but we cannot use the way that, so if a company gives us the emails that it received and also gives us a reaction to the emails that it created, we cannot use these tuples for training because the outcomes that are created by the company are erratic. And that has to do with many factors. It has to do with human error, but it has also to do with, for example, they have a period where they have understaffed. So they just give a stereotyped answer to all the letters, and later on, and they say we will get back to you later, but we cannot react for the next 3 weeks. So you have a heterogeneous outcome which is not very well related to the input, and so therefore you have to very carefully curate the training material that you use to train such complex chains of functions and operators. But if you do this, then you can achieve very impressive results. For example, we have automated in the insurance industry. There are bills that are, for example, created by when a car gets repaired, a bill is created. We have created an algorithm that can automatically evaluate whether the bill is correct. So, and that's very hard because it's usually done by a technician who looks at the bill and figures out whether the workshop repaired the car in the right way. And what we do is that we take the bill and transform the bill into mathematical logic. And then we get for this car, the car repair instructions by the manufacturer of the car. which we also transform into mathematical logic. And then we do mechanical theorem proving to prove for each step whether this step corresponds to a step that is also described in the repair instructions. This way, we have a mechanical evaluation of the correctness of the repair of a car. And so this is quite impressive because it's a very demanding technical skill that I'm not able to perform. So I cannot perform what this computer program can because I don't know enough about car repair. Of course, the computer knows nothing about car repair, but it can formalize the repair bill from the workshop, and it can formalize the repair instructions into mathematical logic. And then all it needs to do is to establish mathematical logical equivalence between a repair step and an instruction step. And this is just an example for something that can achieve with Turing machines. And there are many other impressive examples. But my opinion is that you need to do that intelligent behavior is very hard to reproduce with a machine, that you have to make conscious decisions, you have to carefully select the training material, and you usually need a chain of algorithms that work together, which you orchestrate somehow. And then that requires some work, but in the end, it gives you perfect outcomes. And we have actually asked a German legal court, to evaluate whether it would take the output of our algorithm in a lawsuit to represent the opinion that usually is given by a human expert. And the court said yes, they would take this because the quality that we produce is higher than the average human expert's quality. So this is just to give you an example that I'm a great fan of AI. I think a lot can be done, but it doesn't all work out of itself. Humans have to design such machines like we design planes or cars or other machines. And then they can work really well and take a lot of hard and sweatshop type of work off humans and create a lot of value. And this is what I would like to show to you. And this compositional principle here is, I think, what real AI is about. And now it can be very cool to train neural networks as one part of this, but a neural network alone will usually not do. And that's why I'm showing an operator here at the end, because this operator is usually a logical operator, and it makes sure that the result is reliable. Because unlike stochastic models, logical operators can auto-detect their mistakes. And so that's why I'm a big fan of combining stochastic AI with good old first-order logic AI, which we both use in parallel in my company. And so we have people who are specialized in neural networks, but we have also people who are specialized in mathematical logic, so that we can obtain the precision that is needed to automate human activity.
Very good.
That's it.
Okay. So thank you, Jobst.